And on your screen is the Welcome to Occupy Des Moines, Iowa sign at the Occupy Iowa headquarters, just a few blocks from the state capitol. You can see the dawn is broken out there. This is the Occupy site, and maybe a mile or so away on our set is Ed Fallon in downtown Des Moines. Mr. Fallon is one of the organizers of Occupy Des Moines. Mr. Fallon, last night you held quite a caucus meeting. What was that meeting last night about?
It was the People's Caucus. We believe it's time for the people's voices to be heard over the voices of corporate interests, over the voices of politicians who are to some extent bought and paid for. And this was our chance to kind of jump ahead of the official Iowa caucus, hold the first in the nation People's Caucus, and get our message out about the importance of the issues that are being raised by the Occupy Wall Street movement, and to empower people to begin the process of over the next 3 days going to candidates' campaign headquarters and bringing our message directly to them.
So you decided last night to visit campaign headquarters, is that correct?
Yes, we did much like a regular caucus. We had resolutions. People came up and aired their concerns, their grievances, their priorities, and then we broke into preference groups. So these weren't preference groups for the candidates that we support. They were preference groups, or as some like to call them, dispreference groups, for the candidates who we dislike the most, who we feel are most off base, whose headquarters we want to occupy over the next 3 days.
So who won? Who won your dislike poll?
Well, Santorum was the most disliked, I think, by one measurement. Hard to tell you. I guess about 30% of the people plan to go to Obama's headquarters. Another 60% chose one or more Republican candidates, and about 10% indicated they were uncommitted.
Now, Ed Fallon, there was quite a few tweets along this line, and I want to start with this one for you. And this is from a regular viewer of the Washington Journal, Jim, and he tweets by Dirty Water is his Twitter handle. But he says, will we find out what the occupiers really want? We've gotten a couple comments along that line. What is it? What is your goal with the Occupy Des Moines movement?
Well, I mean, pay attention, Jim. We're saying it as loud and as clear as we can. We are tired of the corporate corruption on Wall Street, and we are tired of the political corruption that is part of that problem in Washington, D.C. You know, so many. I'm a former politician. I'm a recovering politician, and I've seen the stuff from the inside. It's not pretty on the inside either. But what you can see from the outside indicates there is a clear problem, and we want to reform. We need to reform the so many different laws. I mean, where do you start? Reinstating Glass-Steagall, achieving a decent bank settlement so that the banks that defrauded so many Americans are held accountable, not just given a slap on the wrist. You know, our list of grievances is pretty long, and we keep articulating it pretty clearly. But if people want to dismiss it as some, if they want to say that we're not being clear, I just don't think they're paying attention.
Ed Fallon, what will your group be doing between now and January 3rd?
Well, again, people will be working after the presidential candidate preference groups that we broke into yesterday. Those become affinity groups, and each affinity group will determine what kind of action it wants to engage the particular candidate with. So you could see people going to their headquarters and maybe just showing up and trying to dialogue a bit, get a little more clarity on where the candidate stands on some of the grievances of the Occupy Wall Street movement. Or you might see people deciding to stage a sit-in. Maybe they will gather outside the headquarters. Maybe they'll be pitching tents. Maybe they'll be going to events as well, events that the candidates are organizing. And also, again, making that corporate political connection, there may be affinity groups that go to Wells Fargo or Bank of America or some of the other institutions that are kind of the corporate poster children, I should say, of the Occupy movement.
Several of the articles this morning, including the one in the Des Moines Register, talks about the fact that that your group may look for disruption and that the police will have to be called, etc. Is that part of your goal? We
have a really good rapport with the Des Moines Police Department. They've been good to us, and I hope that model can be replicated across the country. Mayor County here in Des Moines, he's been a real ally, and to the extent that he's been willing to find a park for the movement to operate out of. And again, the police were at our office last night. We have a good rapport. They know that some of us may be risking arrest. We know that it makes sense for us to try to do so in a way that doesn't put them at physical harm. This movement in Des Moines, and I think nationally, I can't really speak for the national movement, but my impression is it's very, very strongly committed to nonviolence. The last thing we did at our caucus last night was we mic checked. We read in unison the pledge that we have made to maintaining nonviolence in this movement. So I don't think, you know, there may be arrests. It will not be disruptive in the sense that there will be any violence or activity that would cause the police unnecessary concern. We certainly are not going to disrupt the Iowa caucuses on January 3rd. In fact, I'm going to be participating in those myself. I have been to the Iowa caucuses since 1988. I think they're a decent event. We're just disappointed in the selection of candidates we have this year.
Ed Fallon, when you served in the state legislature, was that as a Democrat or a Republican?
As a Democrat.
So,
but that said, I am going to go to the Republican caucus.
I thought you had to be registered as a Republican to participate in the caucuses. That it was a closed system.
I'm very, very disappointed in the. Okay, the Democratic Party has left me. It's not the party that I once thought represented people's values. It is a huge disappointment. President Obama, who I supported, is a huge disappointment. And so I feel pretty homeless when it comes to major party affiliation. And the system is pretty open. You can register as a Democrat or Republican and go to that party's caucus.
And you can register, can you register that day?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and I feel I can make have a much bigger impact on the Republican caucus. Again, I know there are people going to the Democratic caucus who will vote uncommitted, and I think that's good. That sends a message to President Obama that a lot of his base is very unhappy with his policies on Iraq, Afghanistan, the Patriot Act, on environmental concerns, oil drilling, the Keystone Pipeline, a long list of things people are concerned about. But on the Republican side, we have a bunch of candidates, and again, some in the Occupy movement will go uncommitted there as well. I'm going to be looking at the candidate that I think does the best job in a field that is very dissatisfying of trying to articulate some of the primary concerns that I think this movement is raising.
Well, let's get to our phone calls. First up for Ed Fallon.
Want to let you know we're going to share you all of this conversation with Ed Fallon and the Occupy Des Moines event later in our program schedule. Going to take you live now.